Open source, SDN, and NFV are looking pretty inevitable within the networking community, that they'll play a big role for communication service providers and really transform the industry. That's almost inevitable. One of the things I like to look at is that word almost. Starting to think about what are some of the obstacles that could really make all of that turn out to be a failure. It's an interesting scenario to think about. The first problem that we might run into is performance. When we looked at the way open source and standards-based computing transformed the enterprise computing industry, this was all based on the fact that computers began to have a lot more processing power and general hardware performance than were actually needed for the applications that were involved. So the software could take advantage of that and work openly and on standards. If it turns out that in networking that's not an issue and that networks need every gram of performance they can get out of the hardware, then that might prove an obstacle to implementation of standardized open computing. So that's the first possible fatal issue. The second possible fatal issue is a kind of performance, I guess. It's information overload. Vendors and communications providers, particularly small communications providers, only have so much human resources they can devote to keeping on top of standards, keeping on top of open source. There are a bajillion different standards communities and a bajillion different open source communities to keep track of. And what might end up happening is that communications service providers and network operators might simply throw up their hands and leave it to the vendors to solve the problem for them. Oh, by the way, parenthetically, Light Reading has a project to help with that. It's called the New IP Agency, and we're really trying to act as kind of a central information repository and clearinghouse for various open source and standards bodies. The third thing that could blow up open source NFV and SDN is foolish government standards, particularly in the area of security. Governments and government agencies might decide that open source SDN and NFV are not secure. Now that would, as I indicated, be foolish of them because in fact those things are just as secure, if not more secure, than proprietary technologies. However, as we all know, anybody who's had to take off their shoes going for airline security knows that government decisions about security are often not made in the wisest way. So they may just decide to clamp down, and that could particularly be an issue in the area of regulatory capture, where people who stand to make money by killing open source convince legislators to go along with them. So those are three ways that open source SDN and NFV could fail. I don't think those things are going to happen, but they could.